the heart of this nation, under skies so blue,
there's a spirit that's stirring, values strong and true.
from the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty, for faith and family. We're diving deep into the heart of what we believe.
Welcome to a new deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Our mission, as always, is pretty straightforward. We take a specific source you've shared, we dive deep, and try to pull out the key arguments and insights.
Exactly. And today we're focusing on just one piece, really trying to understand its particular perspective on, well, a complex mix of things, federal spending, immigration, and how different levels of government interact.
Okay, so let's unpack this source. It's an article from the American Spectator. The author is J.T. Young, and it was published June 10th, 2025. And the main idea, the core proposal in it, is about tackling federal spending and immigration enforcement together at the same time.
Right. And the way the article suggests doing this is by cutting federal funds to jurisdictions that the author claims are obstructing federal immigration law.
Okay.
And the piece really frames this as something Congress, specifically congressional Republicans, according to the source, could use to hit both budget goals and these immigration enforcement objectives.
So our job today is to walk through the specific points, the number, the examples that J.T. Young lays out in this particular article.
Yeah, we're sticking right to what's written here, just trying to get a handle on the author's view about the connection between federal money, the article uses the word lucre, and, well, the government's power to enforce rules, the leverage.
Interesting terms. And the article seems to position a recent event as kind of the catalyst, right?
It does. It points to the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, releasing a list identifying what the author calls sanctuary jurisdictions.
Right. So the article emphasizes this DHS list. It says it identifies over 600 jurisdictions that are, and I'm quoting the characterization here, deliberately obstructing the enforcement of federal immigration laws and endangering American citizens.
And the piece also mentions that other groups, like FAIR, the Federation for American Immigration Reform, they count even more. Over 1,000, apparently.
Wow. Okay, so a significant number of places according to these sources.
And a key point the author seems to want to make is about the political leaning of these places.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, the article states almost all of them are described as blue. It specifically mentions 16 states identified as state sanctuary jurisdictions.
16?
16, yeah. And notes they all voted for Harris in 2024. And then it adds D.C. and Rhode Island, apparently because of a court order related to sanctuary policies there. That brings it to 18.
18 total then.
And the author stresses all 18 cited as blue.
I see. And this list, this political dimension, how does the article connect that back to the budget?
Well, it links it directly to work the author says congressional Republicans are doing on a budget proposal to cut spending.
Okay.
The suggestion is that DHS has basically handed them a perfect opportunity to merge these things, use budget reconciliation, use the annual appropriations bills to, well, cut the federal money going to these specific places.
And what's the justification given for why this is okay to do?
The core argument presented is really a comparison. The author asks, why should these jurisdictions, which they claim willfully interfere with immigration law, be treated any differently than, say, individuals or companies that break federal laws and lose benefits or contracts because of it?
Interesting comparison. So the argument is about consistency in applying consequences for breaking federal law.
That's the idea presented.
Yeah.
The author pushes it, asking why. For things like environmental rules or civil rights, we wouldn't let jurisdictions just ignore federal laws without losing federal benefits.
Right.
So the piece calls the federal government indulgent for not doing the same when it comes to immigration law enforcement, as the author sees it.
And it's not just symbolic, right? The article talks about the actual money involved.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Big money.
Yeah.
The author points to the sheer scale of federal funds going to state and local governments. It references the OMB's historical tables.
OMB, Office of Management and Budget.
Right. And those tables apparently show $1.1 trillion in federal grants just this fiscal year.
1.1 trillion. That's a huge number. It sets the scale.
It really does. And to make it more concrete, the article uses New York City as an example.
Okay, what about NYC?
It cites the New York State Comptroller, saying the city gets $7.4 billion in federal funding.
$7.4 billion.
Which the article says is 6.4% of its total budget. And The author points out, NYC is big, but there are over 600 other places on that list. The implication being the total amount across all of them could be really substantial.
So the potential impact could be quite large, financially speaking.
That's the suggestion. The article says even just reducing the funding, not necessarily cutting it all, could send a huge message. And the potential spending cuts are framed as possibly significant savings, especially given how many jurisdictions are on the list and how large some of them are.
So how does this help the budget specifically, according to the author? Does the money just disappear into deficit reduction?
Well, that's exactly what the article contends. It argues that because any savings would only last as long as these places, refuse to comply with immigration law.
Okay, so it's conditional saving.
Right. So you couldn't reliably count on that money to pay for new spending or tax cuts somewhere else.
I see the logic presented there.
Therefore, the author argues, any savings generated have to go towards deficit reduction, which the piece notes is a big demand from conservatives.
Makes sense within that framework. What about the political angle? Does the author see downsides for Republicans proposing this?
From the political view presented in the article, it seems appealing to the author because, as they describe it, almost none of the jurisdictions identified are red.
Okay, so it wouldn't divide the party proposing it, is the idea?
That's the argument. It should not divide Republicans. And it also suggests that since no Democrats are expected to vote for the specific Republican budget proposal anyway,
Right.
cutting this funding would not hurt the vote total for that bill. It's presented as politically strategic within that context.
Got it. Are there other effects mentioned beyond just the money and the politics?
Yeah, the article suggests potential behavioral changes too, kind of like collateral benefits.
Oh, like what?
The author believes some jurisdictions might just instantly change their tune if they actually faced losing funds. And the piece points to Dallas, Texas as an example, saying it recently changed its stance on immigration enforcement, according to the author, even without this specific funding threat.
So the threat alone might be enough in some cases, the article suggests.
That's the implication. And this potential change of behavior is framed as having, well, a dual positive impact in the author's view.
Dual impact.
Yeah. Flipping sanctuary jurisdictions to law-enforcing jurisdictions, the article claims, would do two things. One, allegedly remove big magnets for illegal immigrants to come to the U.S.
Okay.
And two, send another signal that those already here illegally should leave. So both deterrence and encouragement to leave.
I see. The article then brings up Harvard. How does that fit in?
Yeah, that's a really interesting comparison the author draws. It suggests the main lesson Harvard taught recently is that targeting the left's government funding is the only thing that gets their attention.
How so?
The piece claims Harvard tolerated antisemitism until its federal funding was specifically threatened. And at that point, the author says, it suddenly paid attention.
Okay, so that's presented as a case study in financial leverage working.
Exactly. And it's used to argue directly that these sanctuary jurisdictions, as the author identifies them, are no different.
Meaning they'll only respond to financial pressure.
That's the claim. The article says these jurisdictions want to battle the Trump administration in courts and run out the clock on his term.
And using budget bills is seen as a way around that.
Precisely. Pursuing their federal funding through budget bills, which the article stresses will be signed into law, is presented by the author as the way to cut right to the heart of the matter, to bypass what they see as delaying tactics in the courts.
Right. Budget bills have different rules, less vulnerability to certain kinds of procedural delays or legal challenges sometimes.
And the piece wraps up with a pretty forceful conclusion on the author's part.
How does it end?
It declares, talk is cheap, none more so than sanctuary jurisdictions' virtue signaling. It challenges Congress to let the left choose to put their money where their mouth is.
Strong words.
Yeah. Arguing that if these jurisdictions won't listen to reason and follow the law, then they should be forced to listen to the law or lose money.
And there's a final reference to Los Angeles.
Yes, it ends by saying, as L.A. burns, conservatives should learn, which seems to imply the author sees recent events or issues in places like L.A. as more evidence backing this kind of financial leverage strategy.
Okay, so it really lays out a clear case from the author's perspective for using the federal government's financial power, its funding, as the main tool to force compliance with federal immigration law.
Definitely. Based on the premise set out in the article that many jurisdictions are actively obstructing that law right now.
And that really brings us to the end of our specific look at the arguments and the details presented by J.T. Young in this American Spectator article.
That's right. We've traced the core argument that cutting federal funds to places the author calls sanctuary jurisdictions is presented as this practical two-for-one strategy.
Right. A way to cut federal spending and push for compliance with federal immigration law all at once.
And we touched on some of the specifics the author used, the number of jurisdictions cited, over 600 from DHS, over 1,000 according to FAIR, that huge $1.1 trillion figure for federal grants overall.
And that New York City example, the $7.4 billion, giving a concrete sense of the scale for one major city, all pieces the author uses to build the case.
And just to reiterate, our focus here was purely on understanding the viewpoint and the information as it was presented in this specific article.
Absolutely. So as you, our listener, continue to think about this, maybe consider the provocative thought that sort of emerges from the piece, especially thinking about that Harvard example and this whole lucre and leverage idea the author introduces.
Yeah, the thought being, if linking federal funding to specific policy compliance can be as effective as the author suggests here, well, what does that imply about the kind of leverage the federal government might hold over states and localities across all sorts of policy areas, not just immigration?
That's a really interesting question. How does that dynamic, using money to influence policy compliance, how does that shape the basic relationship between federal, state, and local governments when it comes to enforcing any federal law?
Definitely something worth mulling over as you encounter these kinds of debates about federal funding tied to state and local actions in the future.
In the heart of this nation, under skies so blue, there's a spirit that's stirring, values strong and true. From the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty.